Good afternoon from sunny Athens. We would like to thank DELPHI Economic Forum for hosting this very interesting panel, empowered by Yes Forum, the platform of open dialogue between young executives, students, and decision makers of the shipping community. I am Danae Bezantakou. I'm CEO of Navigator Shipping Consultants and concept founder of Yes Forum. And at this point, I would like to welcome our panelists to the panel of how to create a sustainable new shipping era. I would like to welcome Ioannis Dragnis, CEO of Goldenport Group, Alex Hadjipateras, Executive Vice President of Business Development of Dorian LPG Ltd, Christos, CEO of Interunity Management Corporation, Ioanna Procopiou, CEO of Sea Traders SA, and Ioannis Martinos, owner and CEO of the Signal Group. Welcome all, and let's start our panel. And I will start a question to Ioanna. During COVID-19, many industries have stopped their operation, except for shipping, that even during these difficult days continue to connect countries and continents, providing medical equipment, food, raw materials, and other products. Which difficulties you face? Because I believe that there have been also some difficulties that you faced.
Firstly, I have to say what a pleasure it is to see familiar and friendly faces, even though it's online. We've been social distancing for so long that it's very good to see people that we know. Regarding the crisis that we're facing at the moment, shipping is no stranger to crisis. In the last 100 years, we've seen many crises occurring, and this time is no exception. Still, maritime transport has remained, even today, facing this crisis today, the most efficient, reliable, safe, and environmental friendly mode of transport. As you said, indeed, many industries have stopped their operations, but shipping, even during these difficult days, has continued to connect countries and continents, providing medical equipment and food and other products. I just want to put a little bit of a perspective into all of this. As you may know, 90% of world trade is carried by ships. And in order to put this into perspective, to see the sizes we're talking about of those ships, a single ship, a dry bulk ship, can carry enough grain to feed 4 million people for a month. In addition, it can carry enough oil to heat an entire city for a year. So it puts a little bit into perspective the size of shipping, and given that 90% of the trade is done by sea. Moving on to difficulties we faced because of COVID. As you know, there have been many restrictions regarding traveling. So as everyone has seafarers on board that need to be repatriated, we are all having difficulty getting our men or women back to their families and providing relief for them to go on board. This is an issue that hasn't been normalized, and we're hoping that this will be able to be resolved. I'll give you an example for the side of our company. For example, we've had 2 captains on board a ship for the last month and a half, close to 2 months now, that we haven't been able to relieve. So this is creating a lot of anxiety for the people on board and for the office staff that need that want to have the right people on board. Secondly, due to travel restrictions as well, we're having difficulty placing our superintendent engineers or our superintendent operators on board the ships to be able to attend the vessels during necessary repairs or dry docks at shipyards. Also, from what I hear in the industry, a lot of people are having difficulty to provide provisions on board, necessary provisions like food or spare parts, and as well certificates that the ships have on board and are expiring. Again, we're having difficulty to renew because inspectors are reluctant to go on board, either due to restrictions or due to fear. And finally, another issue that we're having is that we have a lot of ships that have to stay idle outside ports in order for the normal quarantine period to expire. So we are facing with extended, let's say, stays that are disrupting the normal trade of the ships.
Yes, but COVID, we did not have any COVID-19 problems on board. So the vessels can be faced as a secure way of, let's say, of traveling. I mean, there were not problems on board, and this is very important. But the crew changes, yes, it was one of the biggest problems that shipping faced. I don't know if somebody else would like to say about any difficulties raised. Before going to, or I will go to Yachting Dragnis, to John Dragnis, because 2020 would be a gold year for tourism and sea tourism. Your family is into this field, and you see that everything has changed with COVID. Things are not going as they were predicted. Cancellations have reached 90% in the commercial charter yachting sector in Greece, and some still hope that the months of July till September, will hold up the industry and with support, of course, from the European market. Many small and medium-sized companies have fallen under pressure of recovering loan installments with no revenue. This is happening in many touristic enterprises. You are in this industry, as we mentioned. How you face all these difficulties arise from the COVID?
Thank you. Yes, very interesting. Welcome, everyone. When we think about shipping in Greece, traditionally we don't think about yachts. I mean, we think about larger ships, bulk carriers, tankers, and maybe sometimes when it comes to sea tourism, people think about cruise ships. However, it is very interesting to consider yachting as well and its role, especially within Europe, as our country and also other countries in Europe are a dominant force on a worldwide scale. Being more general, tourism and travel is generally about 10% of the world GDP, affecting 330 million lives as workers. Currently, the current pandemic is estimated that it has affected more than 100 million jobs, and it's still ongoing. Now, as far as Europe is concerned, we contribute around 30% of that global GDP on that. Now, going specifically into yachting, where Greece has a competitive advantage and is a very important player in this market, there are around, let's say, about 5,000 yachts worldwide with regards to 20-25 meters and upwards. The United States is the largest owner and with around 23% of the market, seconded by Russia with 10%. Greece, it's a third in terms of ownership with 6.5%, and then by UK, I think also Germany and other European countries. Now, as a business, yachting contributes around $5 billion a year in terms of new building construction. So around $5 billion a year are being built with regards of new yachts. And this creates, of course, very high value tonnage and high value jobs. 70% of that belongs to European countries, and specifically to Germany, Italy, and the Netherlands. Spain and is also somewhat of a player, but Greece, unfortunately, not so much yet. But I hope that in the future we can play a more important role. As far as the global yacht charter market, that is even more interesting. As 2018, this market was valued at around 11 billion worldwide and is projected to reach around $16 billion by 2026, registering an compound annual growth rate of around 6%. Now, Europe and specifically the Mediterranean is about 45% of that market. And this is just focused on a few countries, which Greece, Italy, Spain, Monaco, for example, France, and such countries get the whole market. So obviously, it is an important industry and creates high-value jobs and also brings in tourists, which per tourist, the personal spend is very, very high. So actually, it's tourists that are well sought after. Now, this crisis, of course, has affected this industry as all tourism industries, but not as bad as cruise ships, for example. It is true that you could argue there are about 90% cancellations, but so far we have seen that clients they want to come, they want to go on vacation, they want to be on a yacht because it is safe, and it is let's say a very, very nice way to be with your family and not be in contact with a huge number of people while having a risk of contracting, for example, the pandemic. But it is quite challenging of how to get here, how to get on board safely. So the airline protocol plays a very, very important part. We've seen very good headway with the European Union Commission yesterday, where a protocol is trying to be established for travel, which will be applicable from 15 June onwards for intra-Schengen countries. And we hope that protocol will be established to third-party countries as well. And we hope that this again will, from the beginning of July, will increase the market again. Our clients specifically want to come here. If they find a way, I think Greece, having controlled the virus very, very well, will be a very, very strong winner coming out of this thing. Now sorry.
Yes. It will be very important also from our side to accept tourists in our businesses, in any kind of tourism, in a safe way. So the yachts can bring them this safe way because they cannot host too many people.
Of course. It's a few people that actually join per unit. Now you mentioned a little bit about stressed companies, and as everywhere, there will be stressed companies, stressed builders, stressed owning companies, and all along the chain, because unfortunately, we were living sort of a nirvana many years. We've had an amazing market for the last 5 years. So many people tend to forget the bad times. And now it all came crashing down in one summer. But I think the companies with a conservative balance sheet and let's say a more concrete model will not have a problem with one season. And I think select tourism and boutique tourism like this will gain rather than lose, even as fast as even from next year, because it is, let's say, a more sustainable and a more, let's say, low. You don't get in contact with that many people. So I think in the short term,
John, crisis also bring opportunities. So it may be an opportunity. And let's go now to the technology opportunity and to Ioannis Martinos. The COVID-19 forced the industry to turn more to digital tools and platforms in order to be able to monitor and handle business operations. From your experience, are shipping companies have been convinced that by using platforms through which technology can be exploited there and there will be maximization of efficiency and profitability, creating new opportunities and prospects? How do you see this opportunity for technology?
Absolutely, and thank you for having me. That's a great question. So I guess we have all experienced in our personal lives how electronic platforms have actually helped us go through the crisis. If you look, for example, at the United States, the whole of the US, 300 million people practically depend on Amazon delivering essential items to them every day through the incredible network that Amazon has. We have all seen and experienced how it is to work remotely. Zoom has been one of the darlings of the collaboration platforms. Also, Microsoft Teams is a piece of software that has been installed now in many of the shipping companies and has enabled a lot of us to work remotely. I'd like to think of how much we all know that the economy has stalled to a very big degree, but I don't even want to think about how much it would have completely stalled if we didn't have these tools. So this is not specific to shipping, but I think shipping has also learned from that. I see a lot of shipping people that only wanted to do face-to-face discussions in the past, and I would have to travel, let's say, to London in order to meet them. Now are much more comfortable, and we can save also some fuel and some carbon emissions by meeting up electronically. Of course, there's no substitute for face-to-face meetings as well, but maybe the ratio will change, has already changed, and maybe this will last even after the COVID problem has gone away. Also, more specifically to shipping, I think that the shipping platforms are becoming, have been many years that companies have been developing some of these platforms, and some of them are now starting to help owners earn more money and also help them to better manage fuel efficiency. They can also help us better understand how you actually use the shipping network to transport commodities around the world and how efficient this network is, to be able to track CO2 emissions and see what you can do in order to reduce them. And also they can help teams collaborate better over these platforms while they're doing remote work. We aspire to be part of the solution going forward. And we think that the positive experience that shipping has had with the use of electronic tools more broadly through collaboration will extend to a greater appetite in the usage of such platforms, also for shipping specific.
Great. So a big opportunity for the technology. I will go now to Alex Hadjipateras. Your company has offices all over the world. I mean, USA, UK, Denmark, Greece. And you have stated in previous discussions we had that Greece's talent pool was one of the main factors that Dorian doubled down in Greece during the crisis and did not move to another country as many were thinking some years ago. Could you please share with us how did you take this decision, and also if you still believe that it was a good decision to be made during the previous crisis?
Thank you, Danae, and I'm delighted to participate, and I thank the DELPHI Economic Forum. Indeed, during 2014, for about 2 years, we grew the size of the office 2 times as we were expanding our fleet. And the reason for that is we wanted to expand somewhere where shipping was embraced as part of the culture, but also where there was a technical expertise. So we felt that for LPG, which is the gas side of the business that we operate in, that Greece was the right place to expand in. And indeed, that coincided with myself spending more time here as well. Since then, and since growing, we've continued to invest here, most recently in automation and remote maintenance, which tied quite luckily into, let's say, what's happening now with people being able to travel to the vessels. So we've expanded our automation team. We have somebody from the office who is a PhD in electrical engineering who's focusing entirely on how to, let's say, address fleet issues from his laptop in the office. And we really believe that the market here is full of talented people. And also there are many ancillary services around the market in terms of, we discussed a little bit software, but other technical companies. So we think Greece's rich history has continued now into the future, and still, because relatively speaking, the shipping industry, although it goes through many cycles, has remained stable. So we're comfortable here growing on the technical side.
Great. So the decision continues to be the good one, and let's go now to Ioanna again, because we are part of the European Union, and Greece accounting for only 0.16% of world population and 0.26% of gross world product, has a dominating role in the global and European shipping industry. Greece is the major shipping nation within EU, having 17% of the global and 53% of total EU interest capacity. What does this mean for Greece's and Europe's GDP?
Indeed, Greece has the largest controlled fleet, and it's no secret that Greece is one of the Greek shipping is one of the key sectors of the Greek economy, contributing annually 13 billion to the GDP, and shipping services account for 7% of the country's GDP. We are also employing 192 people, both on shore and at sea. So Greek shipping is one of the biggest contributors of the Greek economy. But similar stories with European ship owners as well, because European ship owners operate one of the largest, youngest, most innovative fleets with a very good safety record in the world. So in order to put this in numbers, European ship owners control 40% of the world's merchant fleet. And even though they're European based, the majority of their trade activity is done outside of the EU. So if we look at the EU numbers, EU shipping industry contributes about 147 billion euros to the annual GDP. And as a whole, it provides 2.3 million jobs and estimated to produce 41 billion in tax revenues. Also, we have to bear in mind that the average income per worker per year is about 78,000 euros. So it's also a high-paying industry.
We can fully understand it, and we're seeing it, and it's very important also to be heard to Europe and to hear these facts. Now I will go to Christos, and I will make you a question about oil. I mean, except for COVID-19, shipping industry and tankers also were affected positively by the crisis in oil market and the high freight rates that caused. I mean, we had some very big numbers to see, which was very good during this very unprecedented situation that we're facing. How long this will last? I'm sure you don't know exactly, because if you can give this info, it will be great for many people. But just tell us a little bit about this phenomenon.
I think it's firstly important to bifurcate the dislocation that has occurred in the tanker market recently from the overall trend. So if we look at the impact of COVID and essentially what has happened here, we have seen the largest slump in oil and product demand that we've seen in a long time. It's almost 30% down. And if we look at the demand for product, it's essentially fallen around 20% in cities and 80% on motorways. This is something that the oil industry has been slow to respond to. So supply did not and still has not really caught up with this slump in demand. We're still essentially pumping out between 96 and 98 million barrels a day. And all of this has created essentially a warehousing problem. What do we do with all this oil? And of course, vessels are very efficient, very safe means of essentially storing the oil, and that's what's been going on, and it's been consuming essentially tonnage for that purpose. What's also happened rather interestingly is, as there's been a growing need of storage, there's been a growing need to also compress essentially the extent of the storage. And what we've seen is that almost all of the Chinese refineries have come back online, and refineries are essentially taking this crude product, and delivering delivering product into the market that's not yet ready for consumption. So what we're seeing is that now the product market is also beginning to reap the benefits, essentially, of this storage story. However, we do have to frame this in, how long is this going to last? Now, of course, I'm not even going to pretend to, to try answer that question in any way accurately. I'll just, share with you the tea leaves that I see going on here. There are three ways of viewing what's happened here in the world today. There's the argument that this is a deep but short-term recession. There's the argument that this is a systemic crisis, and then there's the argument that it's just a shock. Now, all the data seems to evidence that we're talking about a deep but short-term recession that has essentially hit the services industry harder than any other sector. However, on the flip side, what we've seen is that governments have been very quickly to respond from a fiscal and a monetary perspective with robust policies, albeit that they may be lacking a little bit in clarity at this point in time. But also we see that the service industry, yes, they are very quick to fire, but they're also equally quick to hire. And so that's why the expectation is that the rebound will essentially be rather more rapid than the recession that we saw occurring about a decade ago. This is to say that the expectation is that this oil glut, this consumption, the warehousing problem will be absorbed. But the big question is when will mobilization, when will social mobility be restored? Because at this point in time, there are some, let's say, terrifying stories of, okay, we start relaxing the measures, and the expectation is, well, rather the risk is that we come across a second wave. And this is really the big question. When is it that we can restore essentially our level to the consumption that we saw pre-COVID?
So this may be, you believe, a problem for the second wave if it comes. Yes, tell me, Christos.
Well, I would say that I would say that the argument of the second wave, I can't possibly comment. The science out there is that's what's really going to be essentially determining the outcome of this. But it would not appear that there has been really a systemic change in the oil markets. The world will continue, has and always will have an insatiable appetite for energy. And that energy is being fueled extremely cheaply right now. If you go down to the gas station, you can fill up your car more cheaply than ever before. And in fact, you're now being actively encouraged to. Really, it is, and really, it's when will governments and when will we have the confidence in order to be able to restore essentially our former mobility to see that consumption rebound? That's the real question.
So this gives me the opportunity to go to Alex again, because Dorian is a liquefied petroleum gas shipping company and a leading owner and operator of modern, very large gas carriers. They're well known to us, VLGCs. Sorry, but this is the CNS, is not so great. Is investment in new technologies a wise decision, and will this investment be an opportunity? Because Greek ship owners have always been very innovative, trying new kind of vessels when they believed that they need to change what was used until that time that they were taking the decision. So what do you have to say about this? You see that it is a wise decision?
Thanks, Danae. I think that specifically, Greek shipowners have a history of being very smart, let's say, market readers and commercial risk takers, calculated risk takers. So Greeks, especially last year, have stepped into gas, be it LNG and LPG, in terms of using that as maybe a stepping stone to future clean fuels. And I think the financing that we see now and the sort of scoring system from banks in terms of how they rate your financing is also related to overall emissions and, let's say, the state of the fleet and how clean the ships are. So I believe that LPG and LNG are indeed stepping stone fuels. Well, LNG has been used for a while, but LPG to the future as a way to reduce emissions. And we have, as a company, to date, invested in scrubbers, but for half of the fleet, and we're looking at LPG as a fuel for the future, mainly because of the retrofit cost. But I think looking at new buildings, if we were to look at them, we would consider LPG fuel because it's a natural fit for a ship that's already carrying the gas, and the technology has improved significantly. So I definitely do believe it's the right, let's say, investment for the future.
Great. We can also start replying some questions from the audience, and I would like to ask this question to John Dragnis. Given the recent situation with the COVID-19 pandemic, do you believe that the inspection survey regime on board is subject to changes to reduce human contact? Have heard of examples in countries like Brazil before the pandemic where expeditors used drones for such activities. We cannot hear you. Okay, so I will do the next question to John Martinos. No, we cannot hear you, so we go to John Martinos and then we continue with Ioannis Dragnis. Where do you think technology, this is a question for you, where do you think technology and specifically digitalization should focus next? It would seem that the current crisis is highlighting the need for crewing solutions. Do you agree with that?
The end of the question, the crewing union is more of a regulatory problem than a technology problem. Technology can be part of the solution in terms of the processes associated with, let's say, getting crews on board, having the temperatures taken, or technology for testing for COVID idea and so on. But really, here we have seen a total failure from a regulatory point of view. And yes, obviously getting crews on the ships and off the ships is really important. As to where technology should focus in the future, if we broadly break the two directions in terms of physical things like fuel efficiency and maintenance and so on, I would say that there are some very interesting companies doing work in telemetry, which is basically the process of getting data from on board the ship regarding the onshore, help crews better maintain and optimize the operation of the ships. So I would say telemetry is kind of like a very important area to work on. And if we discussed about commercial shipping, I think there's a lot that can be done in improving our understanding of the markets. But this is not, let's say, as much of a straightforward problem that has been solved in other industries yet. Whereas telemetry is one of the problems that has been in aviation for years, in Formula One for years, and there's a lot to learn from those industries in how to implement it in shipping.
Great. Ioanna, how important is it for shipping to remain in this part of the world, linking it with the up-and-coming regulations and legal tax framework? How this can drive shipping to other more favorable hubs?
I think it's, to begin the question, we have to understand the nature of shipping. Shipping is a truly international and truly mobile business. We have assets floating in the high seas, and as such, they can move anywhere in the world. The businesses are not tied with factories and land-based structures. So it's very easy for shipping to move to favorable environments. At the moment, what we see in Europe and generally worldwide is that EU shipping is competing with non-EU ship owners, who often benefit from much lower cost structures. And in many cases, their own government gives them active support because they want to develop their maritime sector. So as such, we have seen a trend for EU shipping managers and operators to relocate in more favorable jurisdictions. Now, when looking at Greece, I looked around to see what the tax burden across traditional EU maritime nations was and open registries. So Greece at this point ranked with the highest tax burden when compared to Cyprus, Malta, the Netherlands, Germany, the UK, and some other open registries like Panama, Liberia, and the Marshall Islands. So this once more how there is an incentive even for Greek companies for relocation to more favorable jurisdiction. The problem of this, though, is that it would be a catastrophe for Europe from an economic, political, and a strategic point of view if that was to happen. Because Europe is very much dependent on its ships in order to have security for its energy supplies. And this has been demonstrated over the past oil crisis, as well as when we have neighbors who are having geopolitical turbulences. We've always been able to rely on shipping for our energy needs. So if the European independent fleet became extinct, it would mean that the majority of trade by sea would be naturally left to China and other Far Eastern countries that enjoy a more favorable environment, let's say. But if that also happens, Europe would lose the wealth of the maritime knowledge, the skills, and the heritage, which is unique in the world that we have at this point. And it's a great shame because, as you know, shipping provides a cluster for educated people, lawyers, accountants, shipping professionals, and is also a high-paying job. So if this knowledge is lost, it's usually impossible to have it back to its original country. So we desperately, as ship owners, European ship owners, we desperately need some stability over the longer term and a predictable legal and tax framework going forward.
And let's not forget that Greece is in the number 3 of the worldwide shipping trading, with Japan and China following, not based on our own cargoes, because the other 2 countries are based on their own on the cargoes for their countries. And also, every voyage of a vessel, it may involve more than 5, 7, or 10 countries. So it's an international job, and we have to do with many cultures every day, different mentalities. And this is something that we must learn from shipping, because shipping trading is 90%, as we said, of the worldwide trade. So we have to learn from all of you that you are doing this very important job. I will go back to John Dragnis because now we are okay. And
okay.
I don't know if you want to say again the question.
About the surveys you asked before?
About the survey, yes.
Yes, I was saying one of the positive byproducts of what's happening now is that there are more remote surveys on top on vessels by the classification society to vet the condition and quality of a vessel. So basically, it used to be the case, and it is the case more or less, that on every single incident, the classification society has to send people physically on board and check certain issues that have to do with that incident and the ship. So now we see more and more such surveys being done remotely, and the classification society also promotes that very fact. Now, what is needed is the seamless cooperation between vessel, the crew, the people on the ship, the people from the office, and the people from the classification society for that to work better and better. So good exchange of information, good technology platforms to exchange that information, and a protocol that clearly outlines the rules for let's say the customer, the ship, and the shipping company to pass the various surveys. So basically, I believe that this is positive. Now, although the class hasn't been able to do such surveys on even more critical components, say that have to do with the engine room, or certain other critical issues, I think that by establishing protocol, that more and more such surveys can take place without the need of people actually flying over every single time, going on board the vessel and checking such issues. They can do that remotely with the feedback from the office and the crew of the ship.
Okay, great. I would like to go back to Christos and ask Greek ship owners were always, as we said before, very innovative and technologically advanced. However, the belief of the people was that Greek shipping does not like technology. Nowadays, we're experiencing, as we already discussed and with Ioannis Martinos, a digital revolution. Transparency through increasing data gathering, as the regulatory and environmental conditions, the last has in particular dominated the European agenda. Could you please tell us what this revolution means for the industry?
Yeah, of course. I think the first thing is that even Greek shipping has now recognized that essentially technology has been holding these economies together throughout the COVID crisis, and so it's beginning to embrace more and more, the importance. The data, the issue of data is actually a complex one. The first step is gathering the data. And the second part is making sure that it's accurate, and the third one is interpreting the data. And at this point in time, we're becoming better and better at gathering data through the use of IoT on board of vessels. The next step is essentially being able to have the necessary tools to interpret. Now, all of this essentially, you're solving essentially for a question, a problem. Why is it that we're gathering this data? What is it that we're trying to do here? We're trying to create additional knowledge in order to be able to position ourselves. We're looking at it from a safety aspect so that we can essentially predetermine before incidents occur. These are the questions that essentially we're starting to ask ourselves, and we're making sure that the data is able to give us that outcome. And this is something that we have seen being ramped up in a massive way in shipping, and it's being embraced, because we have to appreciate that this is a very capital intensive industry. It's one where we entrust very few mariners on board very expensive vessels, and in order to give them the absolute maximum support, we have to be able to also give them the tools to be able to collect data and feed it back to us, so that we can then in turn interpret it. I also think that we're seeing the formation of fantastic data interpretation tools, essentially the ability to organize big data in order to actually make sense of it, because we're moving, and the dream essentially of these data companies is to move away from an environment where we're processing and we can interpret what is going on board into something that's a more predictive model. And that really is that really is the dream, whether it's safety related, whether it's commercially related, or it has a lot of applications.
Okay, let's see if the dream comes true. Sometimes things are happening earlier than what we're planning of, and this happened with COVID. We saw many things changing in just 1 month.
Yeah,
Yes,
I think so. What I'd say is that COVID has actually, it's opened a number of doors, which I believe will never be shut again. The first one is being able to work from home. And that's an important one that a lot of employers are beginning to realize. And this is something that I think will be continued. The second thing is there were a number of technologies that had been put to one side because there wasn't the immediate need to put them to effect, to beta test them. One particular one, which we work on ourselves as well, is the augmented reality on board vessels, being able to essentially send someone on board with a panoramic camera, and then from shore-based being able to wear VR goggles and view what it is that the camera sees. Okay, now the camera can actually capture a lot more than any surveyor on board, because it gives you the opportunity simply to pause, look around, and scrutinize the condition of the vessel. Now, this was primarily used, or in our experience, was primarily used by clients that wanted to carry out precondition surveys. They figured that the cheapest way of getting the broadest possible spec before an SMP event was essentially to gather that. A superficial inspection conducted through a 3D camera and the use of AR goggles to then view the data and then annotate actually on the image. It's very efficient. Now this is slowly starting to gain traction, as Yanni touched on as well, with surveyors, where they're beginning to recognize that these technological solutions, in fact, do serve being able to circumvent class surveyors physically going on board vessels, possibly OKIMF surveyors, and we're beginning to see this, really traction in the industry. And then, of course, I'm sure everyone on the panel has upgraded that bandwidth, and in their offices and in their homes and on board the vessels. And this was something that had been put to one side. Essentially, the main thrust behind increasing bandwidth on vessels was being able to give crew the necessary contact that they wanted with their families ashore, and bring that proximity. Now, the need for increased bandwidth is, of course, about being able to deliver this mass data and these images that we require in short order. And so I think we're really seeing an acceleration in that demand as well.
Yes, and we have to say now that shipping is used to work remotely. I mean, I think that we have been trained from before. We did not know what COVID, but COVID proved to us that we can also work from home. And it's also very important that we're doing less traveling, and this may also reduce some costs that there were people sent on board just to check something for an hour. So the cost and the time lost was very important if he or she would stay back to the office. So, and before going to Alex for the top question for the young people, I don't know if the audience is inspired because this panel is empowered by Young Executive Shipping Forum, by Yes Forum, but before going to Alex, I would like, because after the comments of Christos, it's great for Ioannis Martinos to reply to the question about the virtual reality. How do you see growing the virtual reality features on the services end in the next 5 years? How fast would connectivity develop between ship and shore for facilitating remote support and troubleshooting, emergency medical included?
Thank you. I think Christos touched a lot upon the subject just now. Again, I'd like to draw some parallels from the shore before we get to the ship, because basically the ship, the main difference that it has with respect to the shore is that it doesn't have the same bandwidth. So the internet connection on board the ship is not, let's say, usually as fast as it is on land. And these applications first are found on land. And we have seen many efforts with augmented reality and virtual reality on land for, inspections, for maintenance, in order to de-skill a little bit the maintenance work and have people guide workers through maintenance tasks. But these have not yet been so effective. So I think it will be really useful for reporting, as Christos said earlier. But as far as it becoming like a really important part of the toolbox in the next 5 years, I think that it might take a bit longer than that. But I think telemetry will provide more of the practical tools in the immediate future, plus what Christos said about remote surveys and so on, that will also help.
Great. And now let's go to the top question to Alex, but also anyone else that wants to reply can reply this question. What about young people? How challenging will it be for them to start their career in shipping industry during this situation? Is Greek shipping willing to help them? And if yes, what do you suggest us? They are asking. So, Alex.
Thanks, Danae. I think that young people historically have traveled to Europe to study maybe their undergraduate studies, school, and this crisis could result in people studying more domestically. But many companies like ourselves have a link to schools to offer scholarships, internships, training, to provide a practical, let's say, experience. So I think getting experience on the vessels now, we're seeing more female cadets as well on vessels, expanding the pool. And then in line with the discussion on technology, another avenue may be to do data science, computer science, to get involved through that angle, which is super relevant and expanding and growing. And I think for young entrepreneurs that have ideas or maybe want to build businesses, there's more venture capital interest in the industry around these technology companies. So I think the European Union will provide some funding for that. And it's a good opportunity for young people to read up about different startups in the industry. And shipping's historically been a laggard. So we're, like Christos was saying, late to adopt many technologies. But for all of those that were on the back burner, now we're embracing them, developing them, and I think that provides a wonderful opportunity for young people to get involved.
So it will be a good opportunity to read more. There are plenty of webinars that are happening, and it's very important to take advantage of this time to get closer to the shipping industry and through articles and all these important events. Is there anybody else who has another suggestion or something to say about the young people? So we continue with, yes, Ioannis, Martinos. Yes.
Yes. I guess what I would like to add to what Alex said is that maybe one thing that is changing with technology as well there is that, for example, when someone had to learn chartering, when I first joined the industry, it used to take 2 to 3 years before they can start actually fixing a ship, which is basically giving out the ship for employment under contract. And that was a process that it took 2 or 3 years because you had to learn everything through osmosis. So you would sit next to an experienced person and learn the ropes day in, day out. And then that would get you to the point where you could actually do something really useful for the company. And I think now, if you have a digital tool that can, let's say, help you understand some of the necessary concepts much more quickly. So it's a little bit, the analogy of, if you have access to Google right now, you can answer some things much faster than you used to in the past. If you had the equivalent, let's say, of Google for shipping inside the shipping company, then you would be able to very much more quickly be able to contribute as a young person to the company.
I don't know, Christo, if you would like to add something. You said before.
No, I think, yeah. Ioannis put it very well. Ioannis put it very well, actually. We have such unprecedented access now to information that it allows young people essentially to catch up in a much shorter space of time. What they lack for in experience, they can more than compensate for in knowledge, and access to knowledge has become so immediate that they really do have a leg up now. But I fully agree with his comments.
Great. So let's go to Ioanna again and ask there is the European Green Deal, is a roadmap for making the EU's economy sustainable. Taking into consideration that many regulations in shipping are institutionalized for the prevention of environment, what do you think that future holds for the industry from this side?
Okay, let's start again with the basics. As you know, as we mentioned earlier, 90% of world trade is done by ships, and there's no dispute that shipping is the most carbon efficient mode of transportation when you compare it to road or air transport. So international maritime shipping accounts for less than 3% of the annual greenhouse gas emissions. Now, when we are suggesting any measure for the sake of the environment, it is very important for it to be feasible, practical, and sustainable, and to be able to have clear environmental benefits. So if you're referring now to the Europeans' proposal for the emission trading system, this is still uncertain. Basically, what the EU is trying to achieve is to place some sort of emissions trading scheme, which is basically a tax either on fuel or on CO2 emissions for all ships that are operating either within Europe or that the trip starts in Europe and finishes somewhere else, or vice versa. To begin with, it's very positive that the EU has decided to take decisions for the environment. But as shipping is a truly global business, it is preferable to have global regulations under the IMO umbrella and not local legislation, because this often questions the authority of the industry's global regulator, which is still the IMO. So including shipping in the EU ETS can have many legal, technical, practical, and political implications for the EU. One thing that is important is to note that there is a chance that shipping to and from the EU will be reduced. Another thing that we need to consider is when we are suggesting some sort of environmental regulation, you might have a thing called carbon leakage, which is defined as an increase of emissions outside the EU because the EU actually took some climate decisions for within the European Union. Another thing that we need to mention is that there haven't been any tangible researches or papers done on what they are expecting to gain from the emissions trading scheme. Like what will the environment benefit apart from what the governments will benefit? Because when you are taxing something or somebody, firstly, the tax will go to the end user, so the end user will be burdened with the extra tax. And secondly, you're going to create a huge pot of money, and it raises questions on the management of the funds that will be collected. Who will use the money? How will it be spent? So I'm a little bit skeptical as to all of this. But also we need to mention that it goes without saying that ship owners have invested in the past and throughout the years a lot to protect the environment, both in terms of double hulls, ballast water treatment system, environmental lube oils, compliant fuels, etc. And we will always continue to act for the benefit of the environment, but we need some proven technology and some proven environmental results for us to go and invest towards that route.
Because it is a long-term process, and shipping up to now is not polluting the environment like other ways of transportation. And until now, shipping tries to be very environmental friendly by following several measures all these years, because we talk about hundreds of years. John Dragnis, there is a question about seafarers and passengers, and I will make this to you because it's good to reply to the questions. Do you think that seafarers can adapt easier than the passengers and apply the new health measures by utilizing their existing safety and security culture? This
Yeah,
is
well,
something that is a concern for many people now with
no, of
the
course,
restart. So
it's
I
very,
think that
very relevant. Yeah, there is so many new rules that we have to consider and follow right now, but one has to create a framework for them, and that is the job of the shipping company, and by extension its agents, which is the crew, to set up a safe environment, clear rules, and which people will understand that the passengers will have to follow. There are protocols, especially in the cruise ship sector, that are actually, I mean, it's about time that they should be addressed. For example, the air conditioning system on cruise ships. That is a matter that has been the cause of discussion and many illnesses for many years that has not been dealt with. And this is the time to deal with that. For example, more filtering and more. You can't have one common air conditioning system that is, who knows when it's clean. It should be an important item of how the air is circulated in a cruise ship. Now, the massive cruise ships actually have 5,000 people on board, so it is potentially a huge, source of germs. Now, in our case, for example, in the smaller, obviously not a cruise ship, but small passenger yachts, I mean, we have very clear protocols that the crew has already in place. We've done that since early February when we saw this thing happening in China. We thought that it would be an issue. Especially, of course, for people coming from Asia at the time, but now, that's the least of our worry. Actually, we worry more about Westerners at the moment. And there are protocols in place, whether it is about on board, about what happens if someone, is actually becomes sick. We even have, let's say, a private plane evacuation. Of course, that's in certain extreme cases for if someone catches the pandemic. But the bottom line, you either adapt or perish. You have to follow the new rules, you have to follow the new reality, and you move forward. Creating a safe environment, and at the moment is a little bit also psychological. Maybe we're overreacting in certain issues, like it was the case when it was first proposed yet, to skip one seat in between passengers on an airplane. I mean, it doesn't offer any real hygienic protection, but people felt that if I'm further away from the other person, then maybe I will less likely to catch illness. But certain protocols will need to beefed up and passengers will need to follow them, but it's our job to make it understandable and clear to them what they need to do. And I think most people will follow. I don't see a problem in the long term.
Thank you very much. I would like to ask one question to Alex because I want to do this question before making the closing, very short closing remarks from all of you, and one question from me. Alex, 2020 and 2021 would be challenging years for the listed companies. Now also with COVID, what will be the future? What do you believe? What do you predict?
Thanks, Danae, for the question. That's a very tough one. I think that, like what Yanni said about the psychology, has impacted the markets. Now I'm talking about the capital markets significantly. So you see tanker companies that are having very strong earnings in the freight market, but their stock prices don't necessarily reflect that because investors are concerned about future demand, sort of a big correction in the economy. In terms of the 1 to 2 year picture, I still believe that there'll be a focus on clean energy, medium to larger companies, perhaps also the technology element that we discussed. So I do believe there are still sources of capital out there, but it will be more challenging for the small to medium-sized companies, I believe, to sustain themselves going forward.
Great. So I would like your closing remarks before closing this great panel, but also by saying if you believe that this historical crisis will bring Greeks closer and bring Greeks to cooperate because of shipping, the supply chain, to empower our cooperations between each other, and not only the shipping companies between each other, but if you feel that this crisis will bring us closer to cooperate for better days of our countries. So I would like to start with John Dragnis, as I see you, about your closing remarks, and if you believe that.
Yeah. Yes, well, Greek shipping and Greece, the domestic market, a little bit different. Greek shipping, of course, and shipping overall will continue and has done remarkably well given the extreme situations that we're being faced with, as was mentioned before in the panel, crewing being the top problem and showing the complete lack of coordination between organizations in order to create a safe and proper environment for us to be able to continue doing our jobs. As far as Greece is concerned, our lovely country, obviously we have a head start. We've done extremely well holding back the virus as some other Balkan countries as well. But the fact is that now, the challenge is in front of us. I think the bulk of it, and now we need to reopen the economy properly. We need to tackle the massive problems that this lockdown have caused to our country, the problem in tourism, and also to see how again we will re-engage people and tackle unemployment, because there is no worse thing than unemployment. I wish more Greeks could go fast into shipping and on ships and in technology and what has been mentioned, but the fact remains that we have large unemployment, which may go down after if let's say the tourism industry opens, but again it will remain, and we have a challenge ahead of us. But shipping people are internal optimists, so I will end on an optimistic note about my country and my industry.
You're very right. Alex?
I would like to, I think that Greece has all the ingredients to continue to flourish in the future as it pertains to shipping. I really want to echo Yanni's point about the seafarers. I think it's critical that seafarers are recognized around the world as critical workers who can have free passage and move through green lanes and airports and not be stranded, because as Ioanna said, shipping has gone through many crises in the past. And I think for the last few months, we've handled it relatively well. But for the longer term, and nobody knows what will happen, we really need to facilitate the movement of seafarers on and off vessels. So we've tried to do that until now by pickets where people could disembark. But it's imperative that we're able to do that going forward, both for the crew mental welfare and also to keep the ships moving safely. But as far as Greece, I think the ingredients are there. Greece has done a great job, knock on wood, managing the crisis so far. So a gradual, slow reopening should provide some hope for the future.
Thank you very much. Yannis Martinos? No, we will go to Christos. Sorry, Yannis, you can.
Yes. Yeah. So I guess, like all of us here, I think I'm really proud with how shipping has managed to continue operating safely. Indeed, we kind of have a time bomb in our hands with the seafarer situation, but I am optimistic it will be solved in time. And I also think that through this crisis, shipping has taken, let's say, its work habits to the next level because of the new understanding and usage of tools. And I think this will be a good asset that we will carry forward with us after this crisis is over.
Thank you very much. Christos?
Yeah, just to pay tribute to and the panelists and the DELPHI team for actually persevering and putting this together. And I think that's a testament to just how resilient we can really be if we decide to be. And that's also, to echo what the other panelists have been saying. I think Greece has been particularly resilient, and the shipping markets and Greek shipping has been very nimble and versatile, and well able to cope and overcome this. We're seeing that Greece is punching well above its weight, and in terms of its involvement in shipping, we can see that the S&P transactions that are going on, they predominantly involve Greek ship owners somewhere down the chain, even over the last few months, and it's a real testament to how how organized and nimble we were, and how we persevered to to kind of get through this. So I'm also a perennial optimist, cautiously so, but I am a perennial optimist, and I think we will find our footing quite soon here, to recover nicely.
Thank you very much. And Ioanna?
Thanks, first of all, for the lovely panel and the opportunity to discuss all of these issues. I think what this crisis has brought forward in terms of Greece, I want to talk about, is the fact that we have been able as Greeks to be very law-abiding and to follow all the regulations that we were, and all the suggestions that we had to do. So it was a completely different image than I think the rest of the world has for Greece. And I'm hoping that we'll be able to continue such behaviors that are positive and that have kept us safe as well. And the other thing I want to point out is that there's been a tremendous solidarity, and within the shipping sector and generally people that were able to contribute to hospitals, to people in need, to so many institutions that made requests for goods and help have been people listened to it, and they were able to find essential material that they needed. And I think in some ways this has brought a better version of Greece and of Greeks. So in a way, I'm thankful for that.
A big thank you to all of you and for Delphi Economic Forum of bringing us close, virtually close. And let's hope that next year we will again meet in beautiful Delphi. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.